I want to welcome you yet again to our CTA Tuesday Takeover. We will be discussing ethnic studies. But first, before we get into that, I want to start us off with a land acknowledgement. If you are familiar with the Native Land app, you can find it at native-land.ca and find out what land you are on and honor the historic stewards of the land and the present stewards of your land. I am currently on Tonga land, so once again, I encourage all of you to honor the land that you are on. And as we transition into what we're going to be doing today here in Tuesday Takeover, I want to acknowledge CTA and their cooperation with our REAC, our Racial Equity Affairs Committee, and our Civil Rights and Education Subcommittee at State Council for bringing us together to try to uplift these racial equity affairs within our state. But before we get started, I want to acknowledge some very magnificent people. First, we have some CTA and NEA directors in our midst, so I want to give them opportunity to get recognized. So Tanya, Jaco, and Telly C, please show your faces so we can all celebrate you. Thank you very much. And then we have some lovely staff people behind the scenes as well that are going to help us continue on with this process. They're also the ones that might first see your Q&A questions. So if anything comes up, they're going to be helping you out behind the scenes. So thank you very much to all of our staff people that are also helping us run this discussion, because that's what it is. It's a discussion on ethnic studies, with today's focus being on tackling any challenges that we may face with the teaching and the implementation of ethnic studies. So to get us started, I'll introduce myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Camille Butts. I am a high school history teacher within California. Obviously, I teach in the Colton Joint Unified School District. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am here as a facilitator of this conversation. I do not actually teach an ethnic studies course, but as a social science teacher, I am very passionate about this topic. I want to now transition into introducing our lovely panelists, the experts on ethnic studies that we're going to all be learning from, including myself. So whoever wants to introduce themselves first, this is your opportunity.
I can go first, that's okay. What's good, community? Glad to be with all of you today. My name is Aldrich Limpin Sabak, he, him, his, coming out of Miwok Yokut's occupied land, also known as Stockton, California. I'm a teacher at Edison High School in Southside Stockton. I teach English language development, English, and ethnic studies. I'm also the chair of the Stockton Teachers Association Social Justice Committee. Glad to be here with you all today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Fernando Santillán, social science teacher from Fresno, from the other Edison High School. He, him, his, coming at you from Salinan land over here in Greenville, California. But I teach on Yokut land in Fresno. Let's see, I teach race and social justice and U.S. history, and I teach Chicano studies.
I'll go ahead and go next. My name is Lauren Beale. I'm a social science teacher at Edison High School, along with Fernando Santillan, both teaching in Southwest Fresno. I call it the other Edison as well. I teach government, econ, honors U.S. history, and I piloted African American studies 3 years ago. And she, her, hers as well.
If okay, I'll go next. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Hope everyone is doing well. I'm checking in from Yokut's land. My name is Octavio Barajas, and my pronouns are he, his, and him. I'm an associate professor of ethnic studies at the College of Sequoias, and I teach Mexican American studies, Black American studies, American Indian studies, social justice studies. And in addition to this, I'm also a member of a community organization of educators, and it's called Kern County Educators for Ethnic Studies. I want to thank all the organizers for this opportunity to speak at this discussion, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing yourself, panelists, and everyone that's participating. You can see we have a breadth of experience here of which we are excited. I encourage you to go to the California Teachers Association YouTube page. You can watch that video there to learn more. I watched it myself, gained more insight. For today, our focus is going to be on, once again, some of the challenges you might face with implementing an ethnic studies course. As we talk about challenges, we want to talk about how we can potentially combat those. So as we transition into some questions for our panelists, I want to also remind everyone that's here, we have a Q&A available to you. If you think of a question that you might want to ask the panelists, you can put it in the chat. We're going to reserve about 15 minutes at the end to go to those questions to hopefully answer some of them, but maybe we'll answer some of your burning questions as we go through our pre-planned questions. So my first question for any of the panelists that want to answer and chime in is, why do you think ethnic studies is important? And what role does ethnic studies have in your various classrooms?
I'd be down to go first, if that's okay. There's a lot of things I could say, but first and foremost, we look at what happened at the Capitol just a week ago, right? And then when I see that, I'm like, this is why ethnic studies is birthed. It didn't come for no reason. It's because of white supremacy, the things we all understand to be true for many, many years, and also for me, more importantly, as a person of color, as a Filipinx American, as a Pinoy, it acknowledges my existence. That's what ethnic studies does for me and for the young people I work with. And for the young people I work with, it teaches young people to love themselves, to also be aware of the agency that they possess. Like, remind them that, look, ethnic studies came about because of folks your age who put in this work. And for me, that's how I ground myself in as to why I teach ethnic studies.
I can go ahead and go next. Wow, I feel like just as the speaker said before me, is ethnic studies is so many things. I think most impactful that I see in my classroom is students being able to bring their whole selves into the classroom, their community into the classroom, their family, especially distance learning, but their families into the classroom, and be acknowledged for who they are and not what has been written, not the stories that have been told and continue to be told that are simply not true about their lived experiences, their ancestors' lived experiences. And it's really a chance to authentically correct the narrative. I think that's what's most impactful for my classroom in teaching African American studies, and students sharing a space, particularly after this last summer. I mean, my enrollment for African American studies definitely went up with students trying to grapple and understand the world around them in real time, right? Even as adults, we're trying to do that, but students are experiencing the same thing. So for me, it's giving students a safe space to bring themselves into a classroom in a safe space and deconstruct like this American experiment is a good way to say it.
I'm gonna jump in the conversation. What an awesome question to ask. I'm like, wow, so much to say to that question alone. And just to add, I think ethnic studies fills in a major gap. It fills in a major gap. And usually when we hear this word gap in an educational setting, the focal point is usually in a very unfair manner, looking at kids and looking at our students as if students need to catch up. But when I say it fills in a major gap, it's a different focus. It's focusing on the major limitations of curriculum that have historically not involved the voices of African Americans, Mexican American, Asian Americans, Filipinos, So this is a way to actually bring those experiences to the center, where many of our school districts are predominantly students of color, African American, American Indian. So I think it's important for that reason, and so it's something that actually is a benefit to all students. All students. So it's and I think it's critical, especially right now, as Aldrich, as you mentioned. What happened just recently on the nation's capital. I mean, for many, it's like, wait, how does that, relate? It's talking about maybe a narrative that is silenced in the media at a national level, where it's very apparent for many of us who are very critical in our reading of news of how pronounced whiteness is through what took place at the nation's capital. And I think ethnic studies provides us an opportunity to build up that critical vocabulary and dissecting, what's taking place in our communities, what's taking place in the nation. And it provides a space to actually have these conversations that need to be had, right? Especially over the summer with the Black Lives Matter movement, and it continues to this day. And so, the violent use of force against peoples of colors is historical. But this is something that it provides a space where students have an opportunity. We are all thinking about these kinds of things. And it's not just those things, but so many more. And get an opportunity to learn about a legacy of resilience. And so I think just to add to the conversation, these are some of the reasons of the importance of ethnic studies.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think I very much agree that it's for people of color, a lot of times the experiences that we live out in the world, our curriculum doesn't reflect those realities, right? So ethnic studies really provides the opportunity to connect these things, connect to our realities, connect these things we learn, and as Octavio said, there's a lot of limitations in our curriculum, and really providing that opportunity to connect our current experiences with a lot of these gaps found in our experience with U.S. history, world history, etc. And just lastly, I know for me personally, ethnic studies has really been something that really, and everybody here kind of mentioned it, that really made myself feel proud about myself, right? So it provides that space for us to uphold our experiences, to celebrate our experiences, and like Octavio said, to really talk about and learn about our resilience throughout American history.
All I can respond is, wow, I'm sitting over here taking notes. I wonder if other participants are taking notes as well. I've seen a few reactions come through. These answers blow me away. Things that I was left with from all of the panelists' responses were legacy of resilience and then marginalized no more. That just hopefully emboldens everyone to really take this ethnic studies back to their locals, hopefully get it implemented all across our state as it should be. So to follow up with that, because I think each and every you really did cover the complexities of why have ethnic studies in your classroom, it's what are some of the most common misconceptions or pushback you have received about ethnic studies? And then to give the positive, how have you responded or worked through this pushback? So I'll repeat it one more time. What are some of the most common misconceptions or pushback you've received about ethnic studies? And how have you responded or worked through this pushback?
So this is a really big topic. Thank you, Camille. It's really like, if you all follow what's going on, of course, in the state, at the state level, it is dramatic. And you'll notice that the folks who are against ethnic studies, number one, they're extremely organized. And the pushback oftentimes, and I've had this with colleagues, like, why do you teach this class? Aren't you just teaching victimization? Why don't you just teach students to just play by the rules? And I'm like, play by the rules? What are you talking about? Their communities have been poor. Like we got, what do you mean play by the rules? Like history hasn't been fair to indigenous people, people of color. Like, what do you mean play by the rules? it's really frustrating, really difficult. I think of images of like the Tulsa massacre. What do you mean play by the rules? So for me, it's we get that pushback all the time, and it's always important to have the data to back it up. You know, like a lot of folks, all of you obviously want to talk about data. And at least locally, what we've done is we've collected a lot of qualitative and quantitative data. And we've had data that showed students want to come to class, students who want to be more, who want to participate more, who want to be part of civic engagement, who want to be in the community. And we constantly refer to that, as well as all these other studies that have been produced in academia. So that pushback happens all the time. And I feel like if you are entering those discussions, have that ammunition, have a cohort of folks to also engage. So it's not just you all the time. And I think that's essential.
I can jump in right after. I think, wow, I mean, the list can definitely go on here with some of the misconceptions or pushbacks. I can, especially the pushbacks, which I'm sure we'll get to even more in depth. But really quick on the misconceptions, I feel like the biggest misconception is people do not know what ethnic studies is. Like, just starting there, right? So they don't understand the definition of ethnic studies, the curriculum, the pedagogy, the history of ethnic studies. So you're really, and if you are starting there, a lot of it is ignorance surrounding it. So what they've heard is just simply not true about ethnic studies as well. So I would say the biggest misconception is, even amongst educators, there's a lack of true understanding of what ethnic studies is. How do we define it? Why do we want to teach it? Why do students want to take this class? So I think the first part is to definitely start at defining ethnic studies, what curriculum we teach, and then, it's like I always say this, like literally like deconstructing what people have learned, because whiteness is such an axis of power in public education. And if we don't name it, then how could we ever change it? So that's definitely one of like the biggest misconceptions. In terms of pushbacks, I will just say, like, as plainly as I can, is definitely white supremacy operating, either in your face, like outright, you know, or cloaked in some type of diversity or multiculturalism, these words that don't get at the root of ethnic studies, I would say. And I'm sure other people can definitely expound upon that.
Yeah, you know, when we're talking about like the conceptions of what ethnic studies is, a lot of the people that we came across that didn't understand what it was were really focused on or thinking about ethnic studies as something that excludes, right? Excluding this person and that person, and we got to get more people in there, etc. And you know, not really understanding like some of the basic principles of ethnic studies that you embed throughout the course, and really the purpose of the course and the way you teach it, right? A lot of people are really stuck on just thinking of a course like in the old school way, like they just look at ethnic studies as just a history class, right? They're just going to go in there and teach it a multicultural history class or a history class that's attached to so-and-so group. But in reality, there's so much more. And, you know, I don't know how many times we've been here in Fresno presenting on the principles that we're intending on embedding in ethnic studies, and just having to repeat it over and over in order just to get an understanding of what the course is and what it looks like, and what it does throughout the course of the year.
So yes, just to add to the conversation, there's been a lot of, you know, on-point comments made already, and I think the misconception of ethnic studies, I think, is as Lauren, as you were like touching on, I think it's primarily based on not knowing what ethnic studies is. I think that's it. I mean, it's often, as you mentioned, Fernando, it's like it's regarded as if it's a history class, or on other occasions, maybe it's considered as maybe diversity is ethnic studies or equity is ethnic studies. And so it's like, a very prevalent ignorance. It's of not knowing that ethnic studies is an independent field of knowledge, it's an independent field of scholarship. It's an independent field of like practice, of instructional practice. And the thing is, it's like this has been in existence for over half a century. And it's like, okay. And for those of us who are engaged in making these analysis of how like power manifests itself, it's like, we understand that there's been a lot of things at play that has really prevented its implementation. So it's a very exciting time right now where there's a lot of conversations taking place in ethnic studies, despite its, long history of existence. And so I think at the very root of it is like denying the or misunderstanding ethnic studies is really looking at discounting like the foundation of its knowledge. Usually, like, and these are things that have come up as well, like in meetings, even when I was a student, of denying the foundation of knowledge of ethnic studies. When I was a student speaking to administrators wanting ethnic studies way back when I was in high school or community college, these are things that, there were certain administrators that didn't understand the legacy. And at that point, now I'm an ethnic studies professor, so I understand it differently. But even at that young age, I wanted it, I craved it. And so, but it was denied because there was a lack of understanding. So this is a huge challenge of that misconception is the basis of that huge challenge. And also, I think the victimization, as already touched on too, Aldrich, I think that's really key thing. And, interestingly enough, just a couple of days ago, there was an article out here in Visalia, in the Visalia Times Delta, that is discussing removing an ethnic studies book. Ronald Takaki's A Different Mirror for Young People is being discussed, being removed. There's community kind of complaints about this book being a text that really propagates victimization. That's all that book is about. So again, that huge misconception is misleading. It has a detrimental impact on the progress of ethnic studies in districts that are beginning to converse and wanting to implement it. So that is very damaging to like the progress of ethnic studies, that many members of the public are operating on a misconception of what ethnic studies is. Victimization is not ethnic studies. That's a huge limitation. That's very narrow thinking. And so that kind of, or another misconception is that ethnic studies is going to be prone or fostering hate of students in our classrooms because they're learning about all these topics that we're talking about, right? And that's a major misconception as well. And it's, and the irony is that same kind of logic is not applied with U.S. history, right? With the Boston Tea Party, for instance, right? Or like if we're talking about those topics in U.S. history, that is never kind of a question considered if that's going to foster resentment against the British. We're going to have a bunch of hate against the British. That is never a question. That becomes a question when it's discussed with students of color, learning their history, about, the Filipinos here in Central California or another community group. And so it's like, okay, we really have to insert, and question, where is that really deriving from? What's the root of that? So yeah, the many misconceptions. So a lot more work to be done on that front too.
Thank you, panelists, for so thoroughly answering that question. And what I'm hearing back is that maybe some more people could go back and watch last Tuesday's Takeover, because some other panelists that are experts in their field define what exactly ethnic studies is, and that hopefully could combat this misconception that you've all mentioned is one of your biggest challenges. And honestly, to go on with this topic of challenges, because that's the focus of this Tuesday Takeover. And then I also want to respond and remind everyone that's participating, if you want to put a question in the Q&A, we'll get to those towards the end. So our next question is, what are some challenges, maybe specifics, in implementing ethnic studies in your classroom, school, community? And how have you worked through these specific challenges? So once again, maybe think of a specific challenge and what was it and how have you worked through it?
In Stockton, we've had to unify a lot of community members. And one thing is we're always pushing to make our program community-based. And And so what we've had to do is, like one thing we have as an issue, as I'm sure a lot of you experience, is this local brain drain of folks not returning back home to our city after high school and they get educated. So we really fight that. And a lot of the work we've done has been because folks have been willing to come back, and then we've been building camaraderie. It's just, as you all know, it's a lot of organizing, straight up, a lot of labor of love, a lot of work. And within our communities, there's a lot of divisiveness that's very intergenerational. So what we really work to do is pull in our community members to come to form this community collaborative. And we have affinity groups that will look over our lessons. This is also how we're building curriculum. We're not relying, we're trying to make our curriculum very much Stockton based. And we'll get folks, we have a group for the Latinx community, Asian American, Pacific American community, Native American Indigenous communities, African American Black communities. And we all come together and also meet separately, and we assign our ethnic studies teachers to these groups so that the curriculum can get built. And you know, like obviously you all know, like, and I feel Octavio just kind of mentioned that with what's going on in Visalia, in that when we give the community the opportunity to have that input and work with our local educators, they have way more buy-in. They're way more willing to be down for what we're doing, and we get way more support. And that's been a big thing for us. So for us, it's been bringing folks in who probably haven't, I'm talking about like OGs, like straight up, like OGs who haven't talked to each other. They got beef since the 60s, but they have all these resources, and we want to utilize them for our curriculum. You know, they have so much to give. So bringing these folks in, letting them get some healing going on, and also asking for their input and guidance as we do this, because a lot of us are much younger here, but a lot of these folks have been doing this work for many, many years. You know, like ethnic studies existed before it was called ethnic studies. So I feel like that's been something very key for us to really make it community-based by bringing in the community in that way.
And you know, for us in Fresno, we kind of started out, you know, me and Lauren, like we're just teaching our class on our own, you know, and man, those first couple of years were rough, you know, like right now the way we're talking about how it's curriculum, that you have the principles, you got to embed all this stuff, and you have to make it seamless. It's something that's crazy hard to do, especially by yourself, right? And so that's kind of what pushed us to really start when we started the Fresno Ethnic Studies Coalition with a couple other teachers in order to expand the program and to get to where Stockton's at, right? In order for us to expand the program, get other teachers also teaching in ethnic studies, in order for us to kind of build some stuff together. And now we're in the middle of trying to implement, after talking to some people over at Stockton, talking to JR, implementing some of the stuff that they're doing. Right, because man, you guys' stuff is so dope, and like we're just we build community, right? We reach out to other people that are also doing ethnic studies, and try to see what they're doing in order for us to kind of address some of our challenges in our setting. And like I said, we're stealing ideas from kind of a whole bunch of different people across the state, in order for us to address some of our shortcomings here in Pueblo.
To reiterate what both of you just said, I think the challenges. I think classroom, school, community, they're so different and unique. I'll speak about when we first originally started. Fernando and I both kind of looked at our school side, and we love like our students. Our students are so diverse at our school, like so diverse. And we were kind of looking, we're like, okay, what is missing here? Like, what is missing? So we kind of came together and we said, okay, what happens if we just propose an ethnic studies class? We didn't think that, you know, that everyone would just back us immediately, get the support that we got originally, but we had a first principal who was very on board and understood the importance of ethnic studies and understood the importance of, especially our school dynamics, understanding why our students needed those courses. Now, after that, it is what Fernando said. You do face, especially if you're the only person teaching an ethnic studies class at your school, or with maybe even your district. You know, I don't know everyone's situation, but it does feel very isolating as one of the challenges, I would say. So I'm very thankful to, Fernando as my colleague, of we could just bounce like even principles off of each other. Or we've had students that are taking African American studies and Chicanic studies at the same exact time, right? So I think one of the biggest challenges is to definitely in your classroom, find ethnic studies teachers, find people who have been doing this work, try not to reinvent the wheel as much, just like you would do in like any other class I teach, right? Like, I don't want to start from scratch in government. Like if you have PowerPoints, if you have books, if you have resources, articles, anything, reach out to people. And I realize the ethnic studies world is so like probably the most authentic teachers I've probably met in my career so far. Just like, here's resources, here's my number, here's this, and very helpful. So I'd say that one of my challenges for sure initially was isolation, because it was nowhere else in our district at the high school level. And then we had a turnover of administration at our school. So that could be another challenge of like, okay, here was our old principal who was a little bit more, what's the right word to say? Understood teachers' needs a little bit more. Yeah, I like that. Understood teachers' needs a little bit more where we were. And anytime you undergo an admin change, you have different experiences, right? Some people are like, what is this class, right? Or may not drop in as much. So I think from classroom wise, those are some of the challenges. Like I said, how you overcome it is definitely reaching out to people and truly building relationships. Like I know it's so cliche, but that really is. In terms of, oh goodness, in terms of the like school and community, Fresno is a very, I'm not even from Fresno, but I've lived there for a long time. It's a very conservative area, but also filled with like people of color. So it's a weird, it's very weird, but I love it. And I would say for the school and the community is the harms that have taken place in terms of public education and these different racialized groups, and having to work within the community to reestablish trust, to say we are introducing these courses again. Some of these courses they haven't seen since the 70s or the 90s in some of these school sites, and to say, we're spearheading this effort, this is why, and that you can really trust us to do this. And it's kind of what Aldrich was talking about. It's really digging in deep with your community, the people who have been fighting for ethnic studies since before I was born, and now it's back. So they want to make sure that we're doing right by their students. So that's another challenge, is like making sure that your community trusts you to do this the right way. And it's a great challenge, but it is a challenge because you have to repair some harms that have been done. So yeah.
Let's see, for this question, the challenges, there's in the classroom, I think, for this question, I think this work in ethnic studies in the classroom, it could bring up a lot of things, right? If we're having some real discussions about race, we're talking about racism. If we're talking about class, we're talking about classism, talking about sexism. If we're talking about these topics, the conversations are going to surface up. And so it's so part of the challenge of implementing in the classroom is the care of the work that needs to be had, so that's going to be really critical, because just as this is why ethnic studies is important, because there's a healing component to it, and it can really do a lot to help out and make an intervention and bring a different kind of understanding to someone who experienced having been an experience of racism, an experience of something like this. So these are the kinds of things can surface up in the classroom. So that's why it's really important that ethnic studies classes are being taught by someone who has ethnic studies preparation, to have that kind of credential, have that background. This is true just as in any other discipline. in biology, in English, for instance. Like, why do we need to take a class in English if we know English already, right? But we do, because we build up we take classes and like learn all this the canon of English literature and etc., so that you can actually develop an expertise to be able to teach it. Same thing with biology. You're not going to put English instructor in a biology class. So I think this is important in terms of the classroom for ethnic studies, is that the instructor also have that background, who has a better understanding of like what ethnic studies is, because we're talking about race, ethnicity, and all these different things, right? There's so many more concepts. So I think that's part of the challenge that could come up in a classroom, that have come up in my classrooms, needing to respond and to understand like how all these different kinds of experiences of like isms of oppression could intersect to make for a more complex understanding of where we might fall on this question of privilege, on this question of of oppression. So I think that in the classroom, those are some things that are really critical, and these are the opportunities where ethnic studies is important to bring that healing in order to transcend, in order to really expand on that healing beyond the classroom, even in our communities, in a family, these kinds of things. I think those are like lessons that could really be a spark in a person's life, that could actually have a different kind of turn on a person's axis of how they view maybe something that had happened to them. So in school, I would say maybe at COS, it's a question of like, how do I defy the laws of physics? Because so much going on right now with ethnic studies, keeping up with the amount of students who are wanting to take these classes, online education right now too, just to be real, that's a whole different like kind of challenge in itself. And then also the ethnic studies, the legislative changes as well. I mean, I'm at COS in Visalia, so now there is going to be an increase of demand for these classes, and I'm doing different kinds of things that are needed to be done to revise all the courses in ethnic studies. So this is kind of the direction of ethnic studies at COS, and it looks very promising. Like the future is really bright, and so I'm looking forward, and I'm up for this challenge. So I think it's a good challenge. It's a good challenge, and with the community, as I mentioned in my intro, I'm also a member of Kern County Educators for Ethnic Studies. And so this ties in, I think, what you mentioned, Lauren, with this conservative climate here in Central California, which is also true from Fresno, Tulare County, Kern County. And so part of it, though, as well, is that isolation that sometimes as teachers we may feel that I'm not sure how many people really are into this stuff or how important this might be to other instructors. And that's kind of the origin story too with our group of Kern County Educators for Ethnic Studies, is that there was kind of like, I don't think that interest is that broad. But then we started to like have these conversations and open up like a very broad network. Now we have like over 100 teachers that are part of this group who are, and we have like a smaller circle who are like organizing, which is, truth for any organization. But I think it's really critical that part of dispelling the myth of a lack of community interest of a community of teachers, and also the community at large and the public. And it's really important to incorporate the voices of students and parents in this process as well. That is so key. That's a challenge. And I think at times, and depending on the school district, there may not be kind of like a culture of having an ear to community, an ear to teachers, where there's been experiences where have been very off-putting to instructors. So it's important to create these kind of spaces in community. And so that is really like, in essence, what ethnic studies is about: community building in order for that community healing and that community change. So I think that's really key there, in order to make implementation a little bit more real, authentic. I think is one of these terminologies that might be critiqued in the sense of identity, but an authentic ethnic studies, that's what that reference is being, it alludes to that implementation process involving, that community response. And at times, districts, it's been problematic. there's been challenges with having an ear or including the community. So it's been very selective historically in many different districts. So there needs to be a more open, a more participatory kind of involvement where that inclusion is more open, where those who are wanting to get involved are able to, not that they know someone who knows someone, so they're in that circle. It's, it's actually, hey, you know what? This is a student who is just like, on it now because they started learning this ethnic study stuff. They want to get plugged in. That is a moment. Let's make sure that they get plugged in because they're excited. They're excited to learn. Oh my goodness. I mean, I can't say how important that is. And that is the shift that as teachers, I think we look for when we see that spark in our students. And I think that's really critical, and it's a big disservice when that student doesn't have that outlet, especially if they want to be involved in saying, hey, you know what, principal such and such, or, superintendent such and such, this is what I think is important. So I think it's critical. And as educators, I think we need to be also there with the community in unison. So I think those are some things that I could share on some of those challenges and stuff like that.
Camille, I hope it'd be okay to add one more thing to that. That's fine.
Of course.
Thank you, Octavio. I was really feeling that right now. I wanted to add, be very wary, I would say, of your school or district rushing ethnic studies implementation. That's a big deal. I always tell folks, like, districts rushing ethnic studies to have it, to kind of say they're not racist, even though they are, is the equivalent of a corporation having like some kind of diversity requirement. They're rushing it, or it's not prepared. And if your district does have it, like, hold them accountable in having funding for it, having training, having resources. You can't just have it and then they'd hype it up, and then especially all of y'all are the ones doing the work. So definitely hold them accountable, make sure they're transparent, make sure they're doing right by the students, by the teachers, the community, because a lot of districts, it's like the in thing to just get ethnic studies. We can all get it, but will it be good? Will it last? Otherwise, you get folks who shouldn't be teaching the class, and then you just get it just so it falls apart to be critiqued down the road.
Wow, I was gonna say before Aldrich shared that last bit that my notes are already full. I literally have to turn on to the other side of my page now because everything that I'm hearing from Fernando, from Lauren, from Octavio, from Aldrich yet again is filling me with so much information. Hopefully everyone participating is getting fed so much. I just want to reiterate some notes I took recently as we were talking about this topic of how do you work through these challenges. Things that kind of spoke to me were to hire and retain Black, Indigenous, and people of color educators as being a huge thing. Organizing was said repeatedly by every single person here. The fact that you have affinity groups, yes, please. Community-based lessons, that speaks so much, especially as you said earlier, the purpose of an ethnic studies course was to really kind of speak to the heart of your students and have them feeling just like that they matter, I guess is the simplest way to put it, that they see themselves in their curriculum. Then you also talked about utilizing community knowledge, which was reiterated over and over and over again, using the resources you have, involve the parents, the community, your stakeholders, the students in the development of these courses. You talked about coalitions, finding experts, having basically virtual PLCs, because 2020 and 2021 as it is, so that you're not doing this work alone, building trust. This ethnic studies education should be mandatory, and especially making sure that these educators that come in have that expertise as well, that it brings healing to your community. You also talked about network is power, so that you're not doing this work alone. And then the last bits of participatory development, so that this is not just a check mark for your school district, but it actually is ethnic studies as a work. Wow. Wow. And if that was just from one question, the rest of our notes are probably so full. At this time, I'm going to transition to more of the audience questions because we have a few audience questions. And if you still want to add yours in, please do so. So our first one up kind of goes in with what we were just talking about. How do you answer the argument that ethnic studies can be embedded within history and social science curriculum? So once again, How do you answer the argument that ethnic studies can be embedded within history and social science curriculum?
If I can add, let's see, it's one of these things. I could respond to this by also addressing another very common concern by maybe some educators that feel like they could be overwhelmed when it's not ethnic studies related, right? Like something else is coming down from the district. Now you have to do X new thing. And it's like, how do I do this? And they feel all overwhelmed and stuff. And it's so these things, especially, and again, I'm coming from, community college. So I know this is an experience that differs from high school and elementary. And so, but I also have experiences working at an elementary as well. So so just to offer some feedback, it's, you could do, it could be kind of a way that it can be embedded, it can be embedded. It is possible. When you get into like the elementaries, you can create lessons that are more oriented in the ethnic studies manner. So it's one of these things that, require, it could be done in lessons that you're doing already. Okay. So it's maybe the way, maybe you're formulating your questions so they're orientated and incorporating the voices of those marginalized, for instance, right? So these are the kinds of ways that you can actually just maybe improve upon what you're doing already. So it's like just coming at it from a different perspective, from that ethnic studies perspective. So I just want to make that kind of clarification that it is possible, and it's like not more work with the stuff that you have already, and you can maybe shift some things around.
I hope you can all hear me. I would just like to add, I think Octavio is correct. I think you could definitely add in principles of ethnic studies into classes you already have, in terms of like critically thinking about race when you're presenting history lessons. The list could go on and on, especially as a teacher of social sciences and history. But I would push back a little bit in terms of, once again, that understanding of what ethnic studies is, right? That it's multidisciplinary, it's interdisciplinary, right? Where a history class is not that. An English class may not be that, right? You're in English class, you're going to learn the English standards, where ethnic studies is purposefully interdisciplinary. It's purposefully multidisciplinary. So I think that would be my way to, I guess, articulate back to that question of why can't it just be embedded? It's because it's a distinct course, right? So it's like, well, why can't we just embed, English 9 with, I think Octavia said it earlier, with biology? We'll just make it a dual course and that'll be your course. Well, that's not what ethnic studies is. That doesn't mean that you can't embed those principles though, right? Critical analysis about power, oppression, identity, right? You can embed those principles in like an immigration unit. That might be done completely differently, how you embed that, how you teach that in an ethnic studies class, I would say. So that's my little offer up.
For me, I teach primarily English and ELD, and I've been using ethnic studies principles in those classes for a long time. And it just really diversifies what we're doing. Like, obviously, as an English teacher, first thing, I don't want to teach about all these dead white dudes, straight up, I want my curriculum, how I teach, to be very relevant to my students. And I'll take things like youth participatory action research, apply that to my English class. And I'm like, all right, look, let's I'm gonna have you all informally intern for these local nonprofits. And I want you to understand how they work and interview them and write it up. And it's like, I check all the boxes on the Common Core for the SBAC, like straight up everything we're doing. Like when you think about ethnic studies and you think about like critical thinking, there's no way that ethnic studies isn't interdisciplinary, that it can't fit in the sciences, that assessing of data, like math, like indigenous forms of math. Like there are so many ways that ethnic studies is interdisciplinary. And what I found just for me, when I started to do this, my students started having the highest scores at our site in their writing through SBAC. And all I did was just make it way more important to them, not just something that doesn't matter. So I feel like it's definitely doable. It takes work for sure, but I mean, that's just what it is. You know, if we want this, we have to put in that time, that effort.
Yeah, I would agree that you can definitely embed some things across. Like me, because of the two classes I teach, right? I teach race and social justice and U.S. history, and I teach Chicano studies. So I'm constantly reflecting on how it is that I teach my history class, right? And yeah, there has been tons of opportunities to embed it, but at the same time, you're still kind of yeah, having to fulfill the standards, right? Whereas in my Chicano studies class, I have way more freedom to be interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, like everybody said here. But yeah, I would say it's doable. Tons and tons of time and skill, doable for sure.
I think this might be the opportunity I get to add in anything as a history social science teacher. Ask your history social science teacher friends if they ever get through all of their curriculum ever. And then propose that they need to add a whole nother set of curriculum. Just see their response. Maybe get them on video so you can see the facial expressions. So that might be another idea to take back if you get pushback related to this. Following up with kind of some of these ideas, I'd like to end with this question. What's your favorite assignment or feedback you've received from teaching your ethnic studies course? So once again, what's your favorite assignment or feedback you've received from teaching your ethnic studies course?
I'll oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go first because yours is better. You know? So my students really like the community cultural wealth tree. So it's modified from the book from Yasso. Man, I have some critical counter stories along the Chicano educational pipeline. Man, I can't really remember. Right? So turning that into a community cultural wealth tree, where pretty much students will write down when they use community cultural wealth, and we put it up on the tree on leaves, and they stayed up there throughout the year. The students really enjoyed that.
I think my favorite, I guess, assignment all time. I have two. They're tied, and I just did one this year. But in the past few years, we've always done a unit on Reconstruction to new Jim Crow mass incarceration, and particularly focused on the rate at which Black males are policed, incarcerated, discarded by the criminal justice system, and so on, right? And we dig into data, facts, et cetera. And one of the best assignments I think that kids just really dig into and are surprised by even when they interview people is I do a oral history project on the Black male experience. And students must find a Black male. And it's usually, I started off at 18, but kids actually told me, like, Ms. Beale, no, we need to start earlier. Like, some of the questions we could start from our peers in interviewing. What is your, assessment of law enforcement? At what age did you have the talk? At, these experiences where I'm like, no, interview an adult. But the reality is they've interviewed people from age 14 who have been criminalized unjustly, all the way up until I think our oldest participant was like 93 in our community. And we all watch the videos together, and the threads that exist, and they're very unfortunate threads, like stark to students, of things that happened when, my great grandfather was a teenager, still continuing today and still in the same neighborhoods in Southwest Fresno. So that's one of my favorite projects. I'd also say the second one I did this year has become a favorite. I created a reader for students. So students analyzed the 7 I's of oppression. And within that, they had to come up with resources and justifications that proved that these 7 I's did exist. And so they created whole readers, and the class is very diverse. So of course it's African-American studies, but oppression is intersectional, right? So a lot of students were speaking about their own experiences. What does it mean to come over and my parents are refugees from Thailand or other places in Southeast Asia? What does it mean when, we start in August and Jacob Blake is, shot 7 times in his back? Like, this is very real conversations that happen in our class. So I'd say those are my favorite 2, where like students just like wowed me, like, wow, like this is translating for students in such a meaningful way and is so authentic and real to them. And also just like academic, like I always tell students, like, yeah, I love that you're able to communicate this, and you never want to limit your forms of communication. So if you could communicate this message in 5 different ways, then I want to show you 20 different ways to communicate it. So those are probably my favorite 2 just units. And I have to add one more. I'm so sorry, but one more is definitely, and I think Octavia mentioned this before, is ethnic studies as healing. The stories that come up can be kind of shocking sometimes in class in terms of just what students have gone through, what their parents have gone through, their grandparents have gone through. And I think what's most unique about ethnic studies sometimes is giving students the space to like speak their stories, but then like clown and have fun. It's not always like this, like, oh my gosh, the weight of ethnic studies, but like just having students be themselves. Like, I'll play 90s R&B sometimes. It's like reverse psychology, and like, y'all get to work, do this, and having them kid around with each other and speak in their language and not try to limit their behaviors in class and things like that. So I think that's just my favorite thing about teaching ethnic studies, for sure.
That's awesome. I want to be in your class, Fernando and Lauren. I'm like, wow, you all have some awesome projects, lessons. And I just and this is the thing with ethnic studies. I mean, there's always that expression, studies are shown, right? But it's true. You look up Sleater's research and other research, the experiences that we're listening to right now that you're sharing, how like engaged students are to want to do this work. I mean, it's awesome. And then for me, I think some of the classes or things that I really like to teach is local history, not necessarily history, but using like local history as a doorway to get into ethnic studies conversations. Like looking into like Jim Crow, looking into particularly like segregation and also in education. So a lesson that I like to teach in my classes is the Winsinger case, which is a court case of challenging public segregation and education in Visalia in 1888, and that blows students away. They're like, "What? Here in Visalia? Oh my God!" So I mean, they know Brown versus the Board of Education. So we begin with that to make sure we get this down, and then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna change it up. Let's go to Winsinger case, and they're like, "Oh my goodness! I didn't know there was a barn being used for African Americans and Mexicans and American Indians to go to school. A barn, where there's all these resources being invested for the white community in Visalia." So that's a lesson. Allensworth, my goodness, that's an awesome lesson too to teach here in Early Mart, where we have an African American initiated and established community. So we talk about that. Also, Raza Wellness Project, again, highlighting the fact that ethnic studies is interdisciplinary. And so I look at how like race can be a pre-existing condition, but also to health determinants or having a factor in health, but also looking at David Hayes Bautista, Dr. Bautista's research out of UCLA, and looking at epidemiology within the Mexican American community, and providing a project for students to get involved and creating a pathway to health for someone in their family, someone in the community. So it's a group project, and they get involved in doing that kind of stuff. Those are some that I really enjoy and get really positive feedback from students as well.
One of the things I've always loved doing is YPAR with the students, because they are able to control the research, and come up with all these new ideas. I did that through this, I mentioned it earlier, grant writing project, where I would connect with local community of color organizations, and they would work with them and support them, and it was beautiful. But I feel like, though, especially now that we talk about being interdisciplinary, that since we've been doing distance learning, this past school year, I've been converting my Fridays to a wellness day. And I'm trying to get I talk to students about, like when we think about wellness, when you think about your ancestors, the way they did wellness was very, very different. And we try to create this community of solidarity, of nurture and support. We spend time celebrating each other. I collect data just to see how they're doing. We do affirmations, they affirm each other. And it's just beautiful, beautiful. You got these young people saying, hey, I'm here for you. Like, it is really bad, right? And this week, two of my students said, I lost a parent. The next day, I lost my grandparent. And having this time in class for healing, like to me, that's all ethnic studies, like just healing and trying to be there for one another, even if it's virtually. So for myself, just as of late, that's been a very meaningful lesson that we try to maintain weekly. And I feel like it's very much needed for the students to, just maintain.
Wow, so many things I've learned, as I said repeatedly throughout today, and what I was left from your shares of the impactful lessons and feedback you've gotten is that we need to make school personal, or at least about their personal. So if it's their history, about their wellness, as Aldrich was saying, just about their whole person. And to the rest of our participants, if we didn't answer your question, don't fear. We have one more Tuesday takeover about ethnic studies. That's going to be next Tuesday. So please RSVP to that if you have not yet. And as I said at the beginning, if you go to the California Teachers Association YouTube page, you can see last week's video. You'll see this week's video uploaded very soon. So please look out for that. So I want to appreciate all of you for taking this time to share this space with us to learn more about ethnic studies and how to overcome any challenges that you may be facing as you go about implementing ethnic studies within your communities. So thank you once again. Everyone take care of yourselves. Stay well. See you next time.